everybody. Mike Griffith here, AJC Dog Nation. Welcome to Ingles on the Beat, our weekly segment as we talk Georgia football. And today, a lot of reasons for Georgia football fans to be happy. We're one weekend closer to the opening week in Nashville against Vanderbilt. Still wondering how many Georgia fans are going to be there. I know that the Georgia fans are going to outnumber the Vanderbilt fans. That's a given. But are we talking about 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%? It could be a red stadium. It could be an absolute Georgia takeover when you consider the venue. Nashville is a lot of fun. Now, Vanderbilt Stadium needs some work. There's no doubt about it. You'll see when you get there, the aesthetics are not the greatest. There are plans in the future for Vanderbilt to improve their stadium. I think they've been stealing money from the SEC for a long time because that money is certainly not gotten back into Vanderbilt Stadium. In fact, it's one of the worst stadiums in the country. That's just not my opinion. That's a pretty widespread opinion if you look at some of these polls and whatnot. But good times. It'd be a night game under the lights. Should be fun. It'd be interesting to tell also if Vanderbilt will be selling alcohol. To this point, I'm not sure where that's at, if they've applied for an alcohol permit. I saw that Tennessee recently did, and that's a game that Georgia will also be traveling for later this year. So we know Georgia's not selling the alcohol in the general seating this season in Sanford Stadium, and now I wonder what stadiums on the road it'll be sold in. So far, Jacksonville still not in the general seating. Tennessee, yes, in the general seating. Vanderbilt, not yet. But some things to ponder, some things to think about, and good news as we look forward to the season. More good news this weekend, a story I wrote, Headlines for All the Right Reasons. Malik Herring holding a fun day back in his hometown of Forsyth, Georgia. Thought this was really special and really neat. I don't know if you had a chance to read that story, but Malik, a guy that comes from that town, 6'3", 280-pound junior, really, I think, a cornerstone of the defensive line, a really talented guy. And we heard Kirby challenge Malik Herring this spring. Typically, Kirby only does that with the best players. So when you hear a guy get called out by the head coach, you might automatically think, oh boy, he's in trouble. Remember last year, Richard LeCount was a guy that Kirby called out early and often. And it was only because he thought so much of Richard LeCount and what he could do. Malik Herring now, same kind of guy, a lot of talent, kind of came on the end of the year. I think he had a couple tackles for loss over the last 3 games. But this is a guy Georgia needs to step up. That defensive line is in question. Good news, Malik stepped up off the field, holding this kid's day back with the Monroe County Recreation Department. Playing kickball with the guys. I thought WMAZ 13 did a really nice job with their coverage of this. Jonathan Perez with some good reports on Twitter. And you can check that out on Dog Nation as we link to that. And here's Kirby's comments on Malik. Malik can be a good player, but he's got to hone in and do the little things right. He's got to be a little bit more mature and serious about things to be the player we want him to be. To be the player they want him to be is to be an all-SEC NFL type. And sometimes kids grow at a different rate, right? The light comes on. I think we all know that from personal experience. If we reflect back on our youth or even look at our kids, they don't all grow and mature at the same time. I wonder if this kid's day was something Malik was an epiphany of sorts for him as he looked at himself and realized that he's representing something a lot bigger than himself. Not just every time he puts on the G and runs out of the tunnel at Sanford Stadium, but also the area and the hometown, the kids that he's signing autographs for, the friends, the family. They're all looking forward to Malik Herring having a big year. I think this kid's camp says a lot about Malik. I think it says a lot about where he's at mentally and from a maturity standpoint. I think this is absolutely great news. Now, today's edition of What David Pollack Thinks. And, you can tell I had a good conversation with David. He's a lot of fun because the cool thing about David Pollack is he's not afraid to tell you what's on his mind, even if it's not positive or even if it doesn't go with what the general consensus is. So when I asked David about Georgia football, I kind of held my breath because I didn't know exactly what he would say. I knew there was a chance he could say some things that might upset Georgia fans. Some fans don't like it when David speaks out against Georgia, but that's David being David. He's going to tell you what's on his mind. It's his credibility. It's how he believes he should do his job. So the good news is, as David Pollack says, there is absolutely no concern with the offense. He thinks the offense is outstanding. He said that he expects Jake Fromm to have a huge year. He's as impressed with this offensive line as all of us, really. Anyone that's paying close attention can see that Georgia has the best offensive line in the nation going into the season. Now, will they stay healthy? How will they meld? What will fall camp be like? There's still plenty of time before the first game's played, but on paper, there's no doubt Georgia has the best offensive line and certainly a third-year starting quarterback in Jake Fromm. I also believe poised to have a huge year. There's only one quarterback in the nation coming back who had a higher rating than Jake Fromm last year, and that's Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama. I think Jake could lead the nation in the quarterback rating department. Not that that's the goal. It's all about winning games. But when I think about the type of offense I anticipate James Coley running, those high percentage passes, a lot of throws out of the backfield that amount to extended handoffs. Now, this is key because, Kirby's smart. We all know he's got a penchant for wanting to run the ball, and Kirby's not going to change. Georgia is still going to be able to pound the ball. There's still going to be a physical offense. But I think the run-pass ratio is going to change dramatically because I think Kirby realizes that those short swing passes and those shovel passes to those receivers, maybe H-back tight end sorts, right? Those are the same as a handoff. And so I think you're going to see a much higher pass-to-run ratio than you've seen the first 3 years under Kirby Smart, and that will also factor heavily into Jake Fromm's passing yardage and quarterback rating. Getting back to Pollack now, I thought it was interesting that Dave had what he said about the receivers. He says, I think the receivers, they're not experienced or great there, but they haven't been for many years, but they're still going to be really good. Well, I don't know. Maybe great is a strong word if we're talking about the receiving corps, especially when you consider that Georgia loses four of their top five pass catchers from a year ago. I think they've been pretty good. Maybe great is strong. Maybe David is right about that. But I couldn't help but notice a Cortez Hankton tweet. And here's what the Georgia receivers coach tweeted out. He says that Georgia is the only school to have a wide receiver drafted every year the past 5 years. And here are the facts. Chris Conley in 2015, Malcolm Mitchell in 2016, Isaiah McKenzie 2017, Javon Wims 2018, and last year Georgia with three receivers drafted, McCole Hardman, Riley Ridley, and Terry Godwin. Now, maybe these aren't household names in the NFL. Granted, it's been a while since Georgia's had that sort of superstar at receiver, but I think it's an above average, even by SEC standards, an above average receiving corps. So I think they're more than adequate. I'm a little bit more bullish on the receivers than David Pollack. But David's point is well taken. You don't see any of these guys. Even J.J. Holloman coming back, you wonder, will he be a first-team All-SEC guy going into the season? Probably not. Now, where are we mid-season? That could be that could be a completely different conversation. We got to see how Demetrius Robertson evolves. I mean, I think he's a candidate to have a breakout year. I liked Lawrence Cager when I met him. There's not many 6'4", 6'5" guys that possess a 40-inch vertical jump. And I know there's people that say, well, why didn't he do more at Miami? Well, last year, Miami had kind of a quarterback situation going on. Nobody did much in that receiving corps. And there you see Lawrence from my visit at the U. We stood in front of the U there. Funny story. The reason Lawrence looks uncomfortable in this picture is this was a graduation day at Miami, and there were a lot of Miami graduates that you can't see on the other side of this camera. And there were a couple of them that were shooting the looks of death because they wanted their kid's picture taken with the U. Now, they all took 3 to 5 minutes. And in my mind, that's all Dog Nation wanted there was 3 to 5 minutes in front of that U. And by gosh, we were going to get it. So everybody knew that we were at the U. And Cager, by the way, has a degree from the U. So he had a right to be there. But Lawrence still, he was a little peeved at some of the rudeness that he encountered from some of the Miami people around. And as we walked away, he said, now you can see why I'm ready to get out of here. I thought that was very interesting. Now, Lawrence is proud of his Miami degree. He should be. It's a great academic institution. And as you can see, it is a fantastic looking campus. But he's ready for bigger and better things on and off the football field, and I think he's going to find them this season in Athens, Georgia. He's already on the Senior Bowl watch list. So keep Lawrence Cager in mind as he competes for playing time. He's going to be J.J. Holloman's roommate already is. If you go to Twitter, you can see a picture of Lawrence and JJ dressed up. Pretty sharp dudes having a good time this offseason. Both look like they're ready to play. Back to the Pollack analysis. He has a lot of questions on defense. I think that's fair. I think we all wonder a little bit about this defensive line. That's why a guy like Malik Herring is so important. But Pollack, unlike me, he's also got questions about the secondary. He points out that DeAndre Baker has moved on, and there's no doubt DeAndre Baker was the top cover corner in college football last season. That's why he was the first cornerback off the board, albeit later in the first round than some might have thought, likely because of a slower 40 time at the combine than we might have expected. But still, I think David's point is legit here. You lose your top cover corner, and maybe he's not as high on Eric Stokes yet as I am. I think a lot of Eric Stokes. I was impressed with Eric Stokes at Missouri when Tyson Campbell went down with that shoulder. I don't know if you remember that play. Tyson put a hit on a Missouri receiver. The ball came loose. He scooped it up. If you go back and watch the replay, I want to say it was about a 63 to 65-yard interception, fumble, scoop, and score. But you'll see that his shoulder is hurt as he's running. He came out of the game. That's a subluxation. That's what it was. That's when your shoulder comes out of joint. I don't think Tyson Campbell was the same guy in run support the rest of the year. And I think that shoulder affected him. Now, Georgia's got some tough guys, a lot of guys that'll play through injuries. But it's tough when you're giving up size, you're 190, 195, and you're coming up in run support on a 210 or 220-pound SEC running back. It's hard to lower that shoulder knowing that you don't got all the juice that you normally do. And I think that affected Tyson Campbell last year. I expect with a healthier Tyson Campbell, and now that shoulder subluxation it's still prone to re-injury. That's one of those injuries that can be reoccurring if it doesn't heal properly. But I expect with a healthier Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes, I expect the Georgia secondary to be better than last year. And the reason why is because Richard LeCounte took a big step this spring. Anybody that saw the highlights that we ran from the G-Day game or the pictures of Richard LeCounte see just how much bigger Richard got. There were times last year Richard got pushed around. He was a little bit smaller than you'd like from a strong safety, and he wasn't as good in run support. Even though he led Georgia in tackles, there were probably 12 to 15 tackles that he didn't make because of his size. He was noticeably bigger this spring. He's that much more assignment sound, and I think Richard LeCounte will play with reckless abandon. He has been Kirby Smart's pet project. We know that Kirby called him out, and we know that Richard responded, got better with his assignments. You didn't see a lot of blown assignments from him last year. There were a couple, but I thought he got assignment sound. He got bigger and stronger this spring. I also think Richard is going to be among the juniors that go pro after this season. Expect big things from Richard LeCounte, and J.R. Reed just keeps getting better. Really, the leader of the defense, the old veteran back there. J.R. Reed is the guy that said that winning the SEC championship didn't mean anything to him because they didn't win the national title in 2017. Now, from the outside, we look at that and say, well, do we believe that? I know that Paul Feinbaum questioned me about that, pressed me about that last year, and I said, no, look, Paul, this is how Georgia thinks, all right? Kirby Smart didn't get hired just to win the SEC championship. He got hired to win a national championship, and that's the mindset of these Georgia Bulldogs, especially this class. You lose a lot of seniors, you're also going to lose a lot of underclassmen. This window with this group, this nucleus, is closing after the 2019 season. Now, Kirby's recruited great. There's a lot of great players in the fold that are growing up and growing into roles. But the nucleus of this Georgia program is going to be moving on after this season. And J.R. Reed is going to be at the head of that. And I believe that's why the defense, especially in the secondary, that back seven, I'll throw the linebackers in there. I expect big things from Monty Rice and Tate Crowder. I really do. There's a lot of young talent coming in now. N'Kobe Dean, Nolan Smith, these guys are legit. These are difference makers. These are future superstars. No doubt about it. I'm not ready to say the Roquan Smith, not ready to say we got any SEC Defensive Players of the Year, but you got some first-team All-SEC guys coming in at linebacker. They're going to push these upperclassmen. These upperclassmen are going to step up. I expect big things from Monty Rice. Remember last year, he was not really healthy. He had the hamstring in the G-Day game. He didn't look right all year. Hurt the foot before the UMass game, sprained the knee back right. I think Vanderbilt practice week. Might have even missed the Tennessee game if I'm not mistaken. So a healthy Monty Rice A healthy Tyson Campbell. These guys get plugged in, and Monty is a guy that's been challenged. I wrote it. Some people didn't like it, but I wrote what a former Georgia coach said. They said Monty can't hold Roquan's jock. Now, I don't know many people that can, quite frankly, but last year Monty was just a sophomore. The expectations were immense on him. There was a lot of pressure on him, and he probably wasn't ready to fill those shoes. He may never fill those shoes, but I think he's going to come a lot closer. I think there's a reason that Kirby Smart keeps sending him out there to talk to the media. I think there's a reason that Kirby Smart has identified him as a leader and why he was a game captain last year, even though he was injured in warmups for that game against UMass. Kirby Smart has this guy tagged as a very important player on the defense. And if he's good enough for Kirby Smart, folks, he's probably going to be good enough for you. I say Kirby has a pretty good idea of how to identify the key players on his football team. Monty Rice is one of those guys. Don't be surprised if Monty leads the team in tackles this season. I think a lot of Tay Crowder. I think Tay's going to have a big year as well. Tay's got that prototypical size, speed, strength. He's another year away from running back, another year into the linebacker position. I think Georgia's going to be off salty inside linebacker and outside linebacker. I like that back seven a lot more than Pollack does. I've got the same questions, however, about the defensive line. I also got a question about who the return man's going to be. Now, I've heard a lot about Dominic Blaylock. Kirby mentioned him in the spring, said that just because a guy's a freshman doesn't mean that he's not going to trust him there. So he kind of laid the foundation for Dominic Blaylock to be a return man at Georgia. Now, that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure doing it in front of 92, 93,000 between the hedges, making that fair catch with the defense bearing down on you or knowing your team needs that spark. A lot of pressure for a freshman, but I've heard a lot of great things about Blaylock. They've been excited about him from the jump. He's a guy with a very high football IQ. In addition to the return duties, I think he's going to be the most impactful of the freshman receivers. I think we'll see him play some in the slot, and I think we'll see him easily with double-digit catches, and we'll see him in the end zone more than once. Those would be my predictions for him. Now, that's one of the return guys that I've got circled. How about Brian Herring on kick return? I expect a monster year from Brian Herring. Brian Herring's NFL future is in the balance, okay? He's only got 1 year to really prove it. These first few years, he's kind of played that role as a backup. He's come in, he's provided a spark here and there. I thought he looked great in the Sugar Bowl. He looked like one of the only guys that wanted to be there at times in the Sugar Bowl, to be honest with you. But Brian had a fantastic spring. We saw that in his drill work, and now he is lined up and loaded for bear. I think he's going to be your between the tackles guy. I think he'll have double-digit touchdowns. I expect to see Brian Herring in short yardage. If you go back and look at the numbers last year, Brian Herring was the most effective running back in short yardage, more effective than Elijah Holyfield. I did those numbers after that ridiculous goal line stand Florida had in Jacksonville. I know Georgia fans want to forget it. Jim Chaney certainly doesn't want that on his resume. He'll have to do better than that at Tennessee. And Georgia will do better than that this year. That Florida, I'm just going to get it out of my mouth and out of my mind. I'm not going to bring it up again this show. Other return guys, James Cook, another home run hitter that I really like. I think we saw him back there a little bit, had some work back there. Remember, at the end of the year, James got hurt. I think Cook is a home run hitter. I think he's absolutely explosive. I want to see James Cook back there on kick return. I really do. I think he's one of the fastest players on the team. If you remember last fall, he was the most talked about incoming freshman on the team. He was the guy that everybody just shook their head and said, there's nobody else like him. He's unbelievable. We saw him break a 70-some yard run against Vandy. It got called back because of a penalty. And other than that, he just had a lot of those tough fourth quarter carries. Remember those games when Georgia was up by so many and all they did was bring in the backups, Fields, and to hand off the ball in the fourth quarter, some of those early games, and it was Cook left and Cook right. And everybody in the stadium knew this kid was getting it. He was only 185 pounds, but they were pounding him like he was 235. He took that beating. He handled that. I think James Cook has a chance to be a very special running back, and I think he's going to play a very big role this year. I see Cook this year playing the role that DeAndre Swift played 2 years ago when they had Chubb and Michelle running 1 or 2 or 1A and 1B. So expect big things from James. We haven't even got to Zamir White. I'm not plugging him in on special teams, though. Not to say that there's anything wrong with him playing special teams. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I don't see him as a return man. I don't think you risk a guy coming off 2 knees on the return team, especially the way you want to bring Zamir along. It's going to take time. I believe it's going to take time. Getting back to Cager told me he had that knee. It took him his entire redshirt sophomore year to get over it mentally. Now, Zamir's a different guy. I think he's mentally tough, but you consider the amount of hits and the type of hits that a running back takes and just the dynamics of that position with the stops, the starts, and the cuts. And I think you're going to want to see Zamir eased into the season because you want him running full throttle, ideally in November, December. Right? That's when the yards get tough. That's when everybody gets beat up. And just imagine if you're able to spring a healthy Zamir White on opponents in November and December because you didn't use him too much early. So I think we see him eased in, explaining why I don't have him on my kick return group. Demetrius Robertson, Brian Herring, James Cook, Dominique Blaylock. These are the players that can be difference makers, and that's important. Because you lose one of the best in the country. Mecole Hardman was one of the best, most dynamic return men in the country. He turned games around. If there's one guy that I think Georgia misses more than anybody from last year, it's Mecole Hardman. He would have had an unbelievable season. He would have been a Heisman Trophy. Instead, he's going to be an NFL star with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he'll be okay, and I think Georgia will be okay too. No sense worrying too much over the spilt milk and the guys that have already left. Now, we do worry about who's leaving the next season, and that's why this recruiting class is so important. I see right now Georgia currently number 4 in the 2020 composite team rankings behind Clemson. Clemson with 5 5-star players. Alabama, LSU 2 and 3. And then there's Georgia 4. I'm looking at the breakdown and how Georgia is recruiting in this class. And there's no doubt Kirby understands championships are built up front offensively and defensively. You take a look at the commit numbers so far. You got 4 offensive linemen. You got 4 defensive linemen, a linebacker, a DB, a receiver, a kicker, and a quarterback. Got to add some running backs to the group. As I look at what you're losing at Georgia right now, you will lose Brian Herring. You will probably, almost positively lose DeAndre Swift. Barring an injury, Swift is gone. Don't even think about him coming back if he's healthy. You're going to lose 2 of your 4 key players there. I guess you bring back Zamir, and Kenny McIntosh gets plugged in, and James Cook. But you need to add a couple more running backs to this group. I think Jeff Sentell has done a great job documenting some of these recruits that they've been looking at running back who were in this last weekend was key. Saw a lot of these recruits downtown Athens. And, oh, by the way, I saw a fake recruit downtown. I got to talk to Connor about this. Now, Connor, of course, went to UGA, and I don't know if this is going to surprise Connor. Let me check in with Connor Production. Connor, you with us today? You over there? Okay, yep, Connor says he's a go. So I'm out walking around downtown. It's about 10:30 on a Friday night. I think I went out to dinner. I had a late dinner, something like that. There is a guy standing there wearing a Georgia jersey. Okay, this is the giveaway that he's not really a recruit or a player. He's got a jersey on with a number, and he is telling 4 people that he is a recruit who has offers from South Carolina, Tennessee, and Notre Dame. And I stood there just to now, Connor, is this a common thing in Athens? Are there people who like to pretend to be recruits, maybe trying to get free dinners or handouts?
That's the first I've ever heard of someone pretending to be a recruit. I'm sure someone has tried to pass themselves off as a football player before, but as an actual recruit, that is truly a first.
It was very entertaining, I must say, because these people were mesmerized.
Yeah.
The guy was talking fast, and they were believing every word that I looked, and I literally laughed out loud. They probably thought I was some stranger. Why is this person laughing out loud for no reason? It was a total. I was waiting. I was hoping to stick around long enough to wait for him to ask for dinner or money or something. But I think that because you see the people that dress like. Do you notice the guys that try and dress like football players? Mm-hmm. What's the giveaway? You tell me. You've been around it more than me. At Georgia.
So the go-to football player look is or that they try to pass themselves off is a Georgia jersey.
Right.
Usually generic. It's usually like 3, which was Todd Gurley's number, and you can pass off as Roquan Smith's number. That's a popular number. 11 is another popular number with Aaron Murray and Jake Fromm. Traditional jeans. And then probably some like cowboy boots or semi-nice dress shoes.
Right.
The giveaway, though, is if you've ever seen a football player out in downtown Athens, at no point are they ever wearing a football jersey. They're not wearing any football clothes.
Correct.
That's just not how they dress.
In fact, they don't wear any Georgia gear when they go down. They
exactly.
don't want to be identified. So be on the lookout. There are people that, because they get it. They understand. Look, Georgia fans they're so smart. fan base. They get it. Hey, it's a big recruiting weekend. Look, the lights are on at the stadium. People know there's a lot of recruits out. And this guy was taking full advantage. I'm sure he at least got an ice cream cone out of it from the Chick-fil-A or the Ben & Jerry's. That's where he was hanging out.
Yeah.
Right around that downtown, right across from the arch. And I just I said, wow, how about that? I'd not seen it before. So interesting. But that's anyway, running back, key area for Georgia moving forward. Got to get the running backs. Very important. Finally, before I close this out, all help and support on Twitter would be appreciated. I don't normally like to do these call-outs for Twitter support at Mike Griffith 32, but the Clemson fan base has converged on me again. They continue to insist that Clemson would run the league in the SEC, and that just wouldn't happen. I'm on the defensive here. I said, why am I playing defense? It's Father's Day. I didn't get to see my kids on Father's Day. I did get to talk to all three of them, which made my day. I was feeling pretty good. Everything's going great. And then the Clemson people swarm me on Twitter and say, can you believe Mike Griffith, Paul Feinbaum, and Danny Sheridan don't believe that Clemson would go undefeated in the SEC? They've tagged me on this. So when you tag me now, it's personal. So I have to explain to them. Once again, the SEC, folks, this is apples to apples, all right? The SEC had 63 players drafted. The ACC had 27. The SEC had almost 2.5 times as many players. There's more depth. And they say, not really. Well, yes, really. Yes, really. Because 8 of the 14 teams in the ACC didn't have more than one player drafted. 8 of the 14 teams in the ACC did not have more. The SEC, there was only one team that didn't have more than one player drafted, Tennessee. That was it, okay? You want to look at the draft numbers here? Here's the ACC for you. Clemson, 6. Great Clemson team. Not taking anything away from Clemson. The Clemson team that beat Alabama in January, I was there. I saw it firsthand with my own 2 eyes, in person. They'd beat anybody in the country. That was the best team in the country. They deserve the rings. They're 55 and 4. They've beat Alabama 2 out of the last 3. Dabo is a first ballot Hall of Famer. They've done a hell of a job. All right? But don't tell me they would run the table in the SEC. You know the last time a team went undefeated in the SEC? 2010. Cam Newton. Right? And before that, 2009 Alabama. Before that, 1998 Tennessee. I covered that team. All right? It doesn't happen very often. 3 times in the BCS era, teams have run the table in the SEC, gone undefeated, and won a championship. That Clemson team that I saw last year, the one that barely beat Syracuse, the one that had a 50-50 game at A&M, you're going to tell me they could have won on an SEC weekend with those performances? I don't think so. That Texas A&M game, they'd have 4 or 5 like that. That Syracuse game, that's a loss in the SEC. All right, here's some more proof. All right, more ACC teams. Miami had 5 players drafted. That's pretty good. NC State had 4. Boston College had 4. Florida State had 2. Florida State had 2? Florida State had 2. SEC teams, Alabama 10, A&M 7, Auburn 6, Georgia 6, Ole Miss 6, Mississippi State 5, Florida 5, Kentucky 4, Arkansas 3, South Carolina 3, LSU 3. Arkansas had more players drafted than Florida State. Folks, this is not your daddy's ACC. Virginia Tech, remember how good they were? No players drafted last year. How about Louisville? Nobody drafted from Louisville last year. The ACC does not compare. All right? So that's all I'm saying. Look, Clemson fans deserve the credit. I think it would be a great rivalry with Georgia. You heard Dabo tell me at his spring game he wishes that he could play Georgia every year. We all wish that. It'd be a great game. It's close. Got a lot of respect for Clemson. But don't go talking about running the SEC when nobody in this league has done it since Auburn in 2010. And oh, by the way, I put this out there on Twitter. Let's play a really fun game. How many SEC teams? Connor, I'm going to let you play this game with us. I'm going to call this up right now. Let me take a look at the Clemson football schedule in 2019. I want to know how many SEC teams would run the Clemson football ACC schedule this season. So I'm going to name off the Clemson ACC schedule because I think Georgia would, and I think Alabama would, and I think LSU would. All right, right out of the gate, those 3 teams. Here's who Clemson plays in the ACC: Georgia Tech, Syracuse, North Carolina, Florida State, Louisville, Boston College, NC State, Wake Forest. Connor, how many teams you got from the SEC that run that ACC schedule?
I think Georgia does it. I think Alabama does it. I think LSU would do it because A&M has to go to Clemson, so A&M at LSU, which is a game A&M
No.
Oh, you're talking
the
just
ACC schedule. The
Um,
ACC schedule.
At Syracuse might be a tricky game. I know you're not particularly high on. They were a 10-win team last year and returned some interesting talent. But other than that, like, Clemson should win every single one of those games by at least 20 points. I think maybe Auburn could go through there with an unbeaten record because they have a lot coming back on defense. So at least probably 4 teams could go unbeaten against that ACC schedule. Florida State is just not very good right now. Georgia Tech stinks, and they're only going to be worse this year just given the turnover or the coaching shift they've had. NC State has to replace their longtime quarterback, Ryan Finley. He doesn't figure to be all that great just given the attrition they've had over the years. Louisville is completely starting over. I mean, there's a world where Syracuse and Boston College are the best 2 ACC opponents on
Unbelievable.
Clemson's schedule this year.
Unbelievable. Case closed. Thank you, Connor. I mean, folks, that's just what it is. And I bring this up because it's talking season. I get it. Everybody wants to talk about how great their team is. But let's keep things in perspective, okay? The SEC's tough. There's a reason that nobody's gone undefeated and run this league in such a long time. You know, you got to, like I said, Cam Newton 2010. That's a long time. It's tough. It's tough to do. All right, Clemson, you know, you had a great playoff. You got probably the best quarterback in college. Trevor Lawrence is unbelievable. Dabo Swinney and the staff, they've done a remarkable job. But don't go talking about running the SEC, all right? Not when you're only beating Syracuse by 3 points. Sorry. And as impressive as Syracuse may be in some games, they lost to Notre Dame 36-3 last year. That's all I got. That's my broadcast for today. Appreciate the collectibles, the UGA bobblehead. My buddy Phil, they do this, the National Bobblehead Hall of Fame and Museum. This is www.bobbleheadhall.com is where this UGA bobblehead came from. I think it's the only UGA bobblehead out there. Sort of bobs a little bit. Yeah, good stuff. Enjoyed today's On the Beat. As always, feel free to reach out. Follow me on Twitter at MikeGriffith32. You can send me an email at MikeGriffith032@gmail.com. And I do read all the comments, even the mean ones, at the bottom of the post on today's thread. It's always a joy to talk about Georgia football, especially this offseason. Something special is going on over there on that campus right now. Like as I said, this nucleus, they know that this is it for them. This window's about to close. There's a new group coming up, some guys emerging that'll all be back next year, but they're going to lose a lot from this year's team, and there's a different sense of urgency right now on that campus. I was walking through there just the other day. I can't tell you what I saw, but I saw enough to know this offseason is going to be different. Everybody, have a great Monday. I'll be back next week for On the Beat.